What's the most beautiful sight you've ever seen?
I have to say the most beautiful sight for me is uh, just a gorgeous Nicaraguan beach sunset. So
Yeah.
I was born in Nicaragua and Cal- moved to Calgary when I was 9. And I've had the chance to go back. Ever since I moved, I've had the chance to go back to Nicaragua like quite often. I'm grateful that I've had the chance to do that, and the connection to the birthplace and the motherland is still like really strong. I feel like my roots are still very much planted there. So it's really amazing to have the opportunity to go and use photography to capture some of the memories I had of growing up there. So some of that includes like a beautiful sunset as one of the most beautiful sights I've seen.
Just out of quick curiosity, is it the ocean? Because I think the sunsets here are pretty dope too. But is it something about nostalgia, or is there something visually quite different than how we see the sun here?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I think like one of the things that I love about Alberta skies is like that that color mix of like the magentas that are so strong and powerful here. And I think some of it is, as you mentioned, connected to nostalgia because it reminds me of like I think like where like on a beach sunset, like it's a kind of like a typical image, but like the where the sea meets the sky, and I think that's it's just something like so powerful for me to think of as like memories of like it goes beyond just the visual. I think it's kind of like I feel like I'm home when I see that.
It's pretty cool. My Viewfinder is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. This episode of My Viewfinder is brought to you by the new season of Back to School Again, a podcast about midlife learners. The next season dives into the power of online learning. Let's take a listen.
Hi, I'm Katrina Ingram, host of the Back to School Again podcast, a show for midlife learners. This back to school season is all about online learning. So for season 4, I'm live from my basement, bringing you socially distanced stories. We'll hear from guests who tackled degrees and trained in the trades, who augmented their skills and shifted careers. We'll find out how their back to school journeys have shaped their lives and how they managed to balance work, school, and family obligations. This season, I'm proud to partner with Athabasca University, Canada's online university. They're celebrating 50 years as leaders in distance and online education. Find all our episodes and subscribe to the show at backtoschoolagain.ca. We'll see you soon.
Find Back to School Again on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also find it at backtoschoolagain.ca. That's backtoschoolagain.ca. This week I meet with Wilmer Aburto. His work is a fascinating and provocative mix of social advocacy and inclusivity. We share stories about facing challenges and the incredible resiliency that can emerge from traumatic experiences. He's a compassionate spirit and has found a powerful outlet through his art, a calling to address the stress and pressure to find mental and spiritual balance. Let's listen in and learn more about Wilmer. I mean, there's clearly with your work, at least, again, the work that you're publishing right now on Instagram and on the streets of Calgary, this, a religious allegory in your messaging. And there's a spirituality in everything you're talking about, looking for joy and happiness, and then seeing this infinity almost in a horizon. I love it. For me, moving from Toronto here, my big spiritual moment was feeling really small. Like the first time I walked up to a mountain and I realized like I'm fucking nothing. Just the scale of the world. That was a big thing. That's why we stayed, I think. But,
So do you go to the mountains often now that you live here?
definitely at the beginning. We were there a lot. Quickly, this last year and a half has been a little different. I got diagnosed with epilepsy, so I stopped being able to drive my car. Helen started her own business, and I was doing some art stuff with perspectives, but without the car and with my brain space being what it is, everything kind of unraveled. And I think the first time we've been out in the mountains in maybe a year was in August. My wife and I celebrated 20 years together, and we were supposed to do some big trip, but we ended up doing glamping for like 2 nights. And we were driving to Kananaskis, and we are like, I cannot remember the last time we were. It was awesome, but it reminded me that we've lost touch with that a little bit. But I don't know, not to be dismissive, but we've been here 8 years, and I'm starting to worry that we're taking it for granted a little bit. So, yeah, we'll see.
Congratulations on your anniversary. That's a milestone, 20 years.
Yeah, it's weird, man. It goes quickly.
Yeah, thank you for sharing about like your experience with like health. I've had the opportunity to work with adults that have experienced like different diagnoses and like spectrum, and like maybe we'll talk a little bit about that and like how the social justice piece in my art has kind of like joined and met. But I've met people that have been diagnosed with epilepsy, and I think I think that some of the like changes that I see in like how people will manifest resiliency into being able to just incorporate like different things into their lives for safety, and also to continue thriving. And I think that's remarkable, like that in spite of these things, life goes on. We keep doing the things that we do, and we just find a way to that becomes a part of life.
Yes, I think this perspective you have is something that I struggled for a long time to accept. I think I've also gone through or am in the midst of some alcohol and drug addiction recovery. And so just like looking at where I'm at today and hearing you say that, and then getting sick in sobriety and having to, I don't know, the corporate buzzword, of course, is pivot or whatever. But yeah, just to keep evolving and not expecting life to be static like a picture. It's been a big learning curve, but and if you've been dealing with people that are overcoming health issues, it's incredible to see how human beings can be resilient when they don't succumb to that negativity. Like for me, getting epilepsy or diagnosed in my 40s, meeting kids that have had epilepsy since birth is a fundamentally, I don't know how those families deal with it. I'm going to investigate that, I think, on a personal note, but it's crazy, man, the things that human beings live through.
Yeah, I think something for sure in what you're sharing is that I feel like really interested in how like finding out this diagnosis for you, like how that might impact your work, and or even like future projects that you will do. And I think there's an interesting connection when we talk about health, and mental health. And I think that, addictions and mental health definitely come sort of like very often come hand in hand. And in my experience in working in work that supports individuals that have been having challenges with mental health, I think that, there has been like very often a history of addiction. And I think in my own life, the connection of art and mental health has always played an important role for me, because I feel like at different times in my life where I have struggled the most with mental health are times where I've leaned most towards my photography and my practice to help me get through those times. So if I can share like an example of that would be in 2017, I was summoned to be a jury foreperson for a murder trial here in Calgary.
What?
Yeah, and it was interesting because I thought long and hard about this calling, and because I've had been working in mental health for some time, I thought, I really brought that forward, where I thought, wow, like that definitely is a whole other realm. And I had a friend actually who was working in the courts, and she was like, oh, Wilmer, like this is like an amazing opportunity. So many people would really want to be able to contribute and give back, as like it's the responsibility as a citizen to respond to this call. So I got really excited and pumped, and I was like, oh yeah, okay, like she's making a lot of sense. So of course then the trial started, and it was 2 weeks of like every day going in and being subjected to like evidence, and of course a lot of it is visual. And as a very visual person, like my whole entire career has kind of relied on like attention to detail. And so these images like really affected me. And I noticed with time that even like during those 2 weeks of this murder trial, I was like really starting to notice the impact, and how like these visuals that were presented as evidence to us like were really starting to like surface like often throughout the day. And so by the end of the 2 weeks, we were kept like actually during the trial, like the jury is actually kept in a locked room. So they bring us into a room, and then we stay there like the whole entire time except when we're actually in the court. And so by the end of the 2 weeks, we had deliberations. So we were like taken to a hotel where it was like secluded location with armed guards outside in the hallways, and completely like without communication with anyone else. And so we went, and then the verdict was delivered, and then they just pretty much said like, okay, took us out from like the back doors of the courthouse and said like, bye. And like here I was then, after like experiencing all of this, and then all of a sudden I was just out in the street, and it was a moment where I just really felt so vulnerable. And I thought like, okay, like what now? Like, is there any way like to debrief about this in a safe way? And so then I thought, life continues, life is gonna go on, and I've kind of, this is one chapter. But then in just like the months that followed, I really started experiencing like post-traumatic stress from dealing with this case. And so I knew at that time that I had to lean into something that I knew would help me. So I started doing a photography series with an angle of capturing like something that I would want to see that would give me peace. And so I was capturing portraits of people of color, and that's when this idea started for me to kind of fill that gap of creating more visibility and representation. And for that next year that followed, I had some real challenges and struggles with my mental health and coping and how to manage that. And at the same time, I was doing this photo shoots of portraits. And so I was really like finding that it was in the moments where I was doing the shoots that I really started feeling more sense of peace. And the very first shoot that I did after that trial, I remember I went to meet, like it was a model that I had connected with, and I went to meet with him at the studio. And I remember just feeling so overwhelmed and so anxious about the idea of like, if I was gonna be able to do this shoot and get through this shoot. And I thought, I'm gonna meet this model, I'm gonna say, here's the payment, but we can't do the shoot. Like I'm not able to do it. And then I just kind of reminded myself to stay in the moment and just be present. And I went and we met and we did that shoot, and it was amazing. And I thought, I have to come back to this, because that was what I found was my way to channel that sense of calm. And I really just wanted, that was my intention, really to, my intention was really to just get through that time. And I knew that photography was the one tool that was actually really supporting me to do that. So at the end of that year, I reflected back, and when I looked at the collection of images, then I really felt a sense to want to share them. And that was the moment where I thought, okay, it might be worthwhile to have an exhibition of this work. Prior to that, my only intention was to just create so that I could keep going. And I had an exhibition. It was called Poetic Justice, and it was just my way of kind of bringing that first circle and having the photography be my poetic justice out of the experience. And so there was an exhibition and a book that I published. The book is available to be purchased at bookstores, and it's also circulating the Calgary Public Library. And yeah, that was the way I think of like kind of wrapping up a chapter, but kind of just bringing it back to that mental health piece of like where in the work that I've done and working and supporting people that have had mental health barriers, it brings it a lot closer to home when I can apply that to my own life as well.
I love it. I mean, one of the things many things strike me, but one is this idea of being present. I mean, that is, from a philosophical and spiritual thing, such an easy thing to say, but such a difficult concept to kind of live or to absorb. Is that something you think has been part of your upbringing, or is that something that you've come to approach as you've matured or gone through? I mean, I don't even know if you're like, are you a lifelong photographer? Are you a professional photographer? Or whatever it is that you've done in your life? Where does this awareness of presence come? Because I have a slightly similar experience that I'm kind of struggling with. Quickly, I was in an altercation doing street photography that was very violent and racial, and I do actually feel a little bit awkward. Even I hang out with my friend Alvin on the streets taking pictures, and sometimes I feel very strange. But you're talking about going to the studio, hiring a model, having that strong voice for like, fuck this, like I shouldn't be doing this, but you're able to overcome that. I mean, where does that come from? That little voice, but obviously a stronger voice that you would find something there.
You know what? I think honestly that it's just my coping is the way that I cope. I know that especially when I was capturing this Poetic Justice series of portraits, like I know I have exact memories and recollections of moments where I was able to just bring myself to the present, to just kind of focus on getting the shot that I had envisioned or imagined. And it really just like took it away from thinking about the past and thinking like, oh, am I going to be able to kind of create work that I feel is really strong? Or then worrying about the future and thinking like, oh, what's going to happen with this work? Is it going to actually achieve what I want it to? And when I separate the, kind of like low mood thoughts of the past or like anxious thoughts of the future, then it just like really encourages me to come into the present moment and just focus on that one shoot, that one moment working, and that time, and I think I know like that it's interesting in talking about photography for me being that tool, because I know I've had friends that like when we've had conversations about how to stay in the present moment, they say, or they share about the things and the tools that they used. And I have a good friend who had said that they do rock climbing, and they said, the way that you're explaining that staying in the present moment, they experience it rock climbing, because when they're rock climbing, they have to focus on that exact present moment, because they if they don't, they're putting themselves in a dangerous situation, right? So I think it's just something that it's good to practice, and I think people kind of channel and outlet it in different ways.
Channeling it, I mean, if I put it in a complimentary term, I mean, you seem to be doing it courageously. So for example, I think negatively, if I'm running from something, it's when I turn, to distractions, be it drugs, alcohol, Netflixing, whatever it is. And there are of course various degrees. So this is not to judge Netflix, because I consume a lot of Netflix, but it's a value word. But there are destructive manners in which to I don't know, deal, but at least cope or run away from trauma. But to set up a project, and I do want to focus on what this word means to you, but to set up a project around the concept of representation, coming out of a situation where you're watching and visually marred by a very brutal experience. I keep thinking that I both want to be called to a jury and I never want to at the same time. There's something dramatic. When you're describing being sequestered in a hotel, I kept thinking about that Gene Hackman and John Cusack movie where they were like manipulating I can't remember that. But like they're hiding in this motel and people are coming to manipulate. That shit's hilarious, scary, but it just made me think of a movie. But to go and make that into a project is pretty fucking cool. And so maybe we can start with this. Like, what does the word representation mean, and how do you go from feeling this trauma into a creative process instead of hoping that it'll disappear on its own, which I think a majority of people dealing with trauma tend to do?
Yeah, and it's such a fine line, right? Like I like you were saying, like, because definitely, like, I mean, there it's just such a, I think, like, mindful approach, because absolutely, I think on those like hard days, like, for sure, I just want to, like, sit down and like drink a bottle of wine, watch Netflix, and like kind of outlet and like just numb out, but I think that because of my own life experiences and kind of just walking that line of like what things are actually going to be the things that are going to ground me, then I know that, again, like, just leaning into my own creativity has been amazing to be that reminder, because at times definitely when I felt like, I don't know if I can keep doing this, like I in questioning, and it kind of, I think it's very layered because it brings up a lot of different things about my practice in general, and then also thinking about like continuing this work of doing this work here in Calgary. And I think, to bring it back to your question about representation, I think what that means to me is more visibility, and more visibility of, I think, different narratives, and turning the narratives that we've been told are true to ourselves upside down. Because I know growing up here in Calgary, I came to Calgary and was considered like a high-risk youth right away, simply because I was an immigrant kid, and so I think just kind of like automatically growing up, sort of with sort like carrying that label, like where, you're kind of just walking a line of like where there may be sort of like maybe a thought that like, oh, like these kids might be up to trouble. And so to me, that like that representation is to create visibility of different narratives that younger people can actually relate to and see themselves represented in that work. As a young queer Nicaraguan kid here in Calgary, I was so thirsty to see images that I felt represented me and that I could see myself in. And that's actually, even to this day, pretty hard to find. And this is a good segue actually to like bring it to like the present body of work that I've been working on, because after I did that series of portraits for the Poetic Justice Project, I kind of thought like I had capped it, and I was like, oh, cool, like that kind of really captured like a body of work that I really felt like happy with. I thought, okay, cool, like we're seeing that representation. And then one day, like shortly after I had completed that project, I was in a bookstore, and I saw this book that like was called Contemporary Portraits in Photography. and it was so like beautifully lit, like it was like in this display with like a spotlight on it, and it was just calling for attention. And I was like, wow. And as soon as I saw it, I like was so excited to dive deep into this book. And as I started flipping through the pages, and that was here in Calgary, and this book I believe was published in America. And so I started flipping through the pages, and it was like I saw like a lot of like the female nudes represented, and I was like, okay, like that's not like when we look at like art history, I was like, that's not unusual. But it caught my attention because in my one work prior to that, I had been focusing on the male nude, and so I thought, okay, so kind of creating a different narrative already. But as I flipped more through the pages, that I realized that I didn't really see any people of color. And I thought, okay, like it really brought the question forward to me of like, why is this called contemporary photography? Because I feel it's not really representing my world, not representing what I see in my world, in my everyday. And that was the moment that really was, I think, the catalyst for me to say like, okay, I'm not fucking done with this work yet. I'm gonna continue doing this work because I want to do it here in Calgary. And I want to, like, I feel really proud to be able to be bringing that lens here. And then that started my new series, which is called Discípulos de Amor. It's the Spanish for Disciples of Love. And earlier you had mentioned kind of like the connection to like Catholic iconography, and that question has come up actually quite often. Like people like wonder why there's a connection to that. And it's a very simple thing for me. Like I like when I came into the school system here in Calgary, I came into the Catholic school system, and some of my early introductions to art were through some of the actual like cathedrals that we would visit. Like I remember going to St. Mary's Cathedral and seeing like this really beautiful, like elaborate work and like details of like gold and like stained glass. And so I think to me that was something that I saw as these like, I guess it would be my way to like be going to like instead of a museum and gallery visit, going to these cathedrals and seeing like the monuments and stuff. And so I think that now with my work, it's like I want to flip those narratives upside down and tell new stories. So yes, why can we not represent people of color or queer identities, femme identities as iconic? Because the people that I have photographed to me are iconic, and I want to share them in that way with the public.
I love it. CPA Alberta represents more than 29,000 CPAs, also known as Chartered Professional Accountants, across the province. CPAs are more than number crunchers who love Excel spreadsheets. They're business leaders, finance experts, trusted advisors, and entrepreneurs. They work in many different industries, from film to fashion, from government to oil and gas. Long story short, CPAs didn't just break the mold, they made their own. For an inside look at how Alberta CPAs are supporting their clients through the pandemic, follow CPA Alberta on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn. You can also visit cpaalberta.ca.